people were recreating newspapers on the internet, almost like you could read this static page of text or images, right? Then in Web 2, it became read and write, so you got JavaScript, and you could build these dynamic applications. Now with Web 3, it's not only read and write, it's also own. So you can own the digital items that are provably scarce in these new types of applications that are being built. And that, what does that mean? Well, it could mean that in the metaverse, you can own digital items. NFTs have gotten incredibly popular recently with artists and folks creating digital content that you can own. It also means that if you want to create a new type of community online, like imagine if you were to create Reddit or Twitter or a marketplace like Uber or Airbnb today, you might issue a token and allow people in that community to actually own a piece of the value. Like on Reddit, everybody is earning upvotes, but they're kind of fake internet points. It's just an entry in a centralized database. What if the people contributing all that value to those communities could actually own a piece of it? That would be really exciting. And then, it goes beyond that. People are creating new types of digital identities with, ENS is one of the examples there, or new types of voting and governance systems with DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. So it's starting to look like really cryptocurrency is kind of like the next internet. It's much bigger than just digital money. It's actually the way that people are going to build most applications with software in the future, I believe. I think, just to give you one more example, and then I'll turn it back. When in the early 2000s, this phrase became common, the dot-com startups, right? And you all probably have heard of dot-com startups. Well, now you don't need to say dot-com startup because every startup uses the internet, right? And I think the same thing is going to be true in 5 or 10 years. You won't need to say crypto startup, of which there are now hundreds and probably thousands. You'll just say startup because every startup is using the internet and crypto and probably machine learning and other things. And so it is becoming the new way most, I should say, applications are going to be built in the future.
I have a follow-up question on that, and this was specifically asked by a couple of students. So if we just stick to Web3, according to you, other than the financial domain, which other domains do you think would see a rapid growth in forthcoming years based on Web3 as a basis?
Yeah, so Web3 is getting a lot of traction in many different areas. So one of them is, I think, social media. People are recreating new types of social media applications that are totally decentralized. So your data doesn't have to be stored by Facebook or Twitter or something like that, or it could even be censored, by those companies. Another one is gaming, right? So a lot of the gaming startups that are being funded by top venture capital firms now have a crypto component to it, where the digital items in the game are being used. Another one is around identity systems, and when you have a digital identity, you can also attach reputation to that, credit scores, things like that. I think even the way that companies and organizations are being created, that's happening in Web3 with DAOs, and you're seeing, it's almost like the new C corporation, or probably the equivalent here, but it's almost like even you could imagine voting and governance for different types of entities, like with physical land in certain areas. Like how would a community, a planned community somewhere actually decide what to build and what to invest in? It could all happen on the blockchain with a DAO. So those are just some of the examples. And of course, artwork with NFTs, right? There's songs and videos. And so anyway, it goes on and on. Those are some of the areas that are getting traction.
Thanks. So we heard that Coinbase has committed to give 1% of its profits for CSR activities, and that's commendable. So there was a related question on that Coinbase's mission is to create economic freedom in the world, and I would like to understand how do cryptocurrencies can play a role in achieving that economic freedom?
Yeah, so economic freedom is a topic I'm very passionate about, and you can go read about it on Wikipedia. It's a term that economists use, and it really is a composite metric. Economic freedom is, they look at different countries around the world, and they look at a composite metric of different things, and it looks at things like, are property rights enforced? Can people keep the things that they have that belong to them, or are they taken from them? Is there a stable currency? Is there free trade enabled? How easy is it to start a business or to join a company that you want to work for? And so you could think of it broadly as how much friction is there in the economy people to go create and build new things, or is it difficult for them? There could be, inflation or corruption or bribery or just a lot of bureaucracy, and that's kind of what economic freedom seeks to measure. And one of the core insights that Coinbase is founded on is this idea that cryptocurrency is a very unique tool, really an invention, that could increase economic freedom in the world. Now think about it, if you wanted to go build good financial infrastructure in all the countries of the world, that would be a very difficult project. There's a lot of local relationships in every country and local rules, but for the first time with cryptocurrency, we can almost inject good financial infrastructure into countries all over the world just with, as long as everybody has a smartphone and internet access, they can get access to stable currency, free trade, they can have property rights enforced. That's a really big one because crypto enables things like a brain wallet, they would call it, or a self-custodial wallet. And if you can just remember 12 words in your head, you can store your own wealth in a way that it can't be taken from you. Look at people right today, recently in Ukraine, for instance, there's refugees kind of fleeing the country, and they sometimes can't take their wealth with them. And there's all kinds of issues like that historically that have been major barriers to people building better lives for themselves. So I believe that cryptocurrency, plus now that smartphones and the internet have become ubiquitous, means that the next generation of people, they're going to have good financial infrastructure and good property rights all over the world, regardless of what the local rules or government or society are doing that's good or bad.
I think it also requires adoption of the technology, and like you said, so long as people have smartphones and internet connectivity, it should be much simpler. But in a country like India, that is also one of the things that we have to look at.
There's actually some interesting, a lot of people have looked at what's sort of the last mile solution. If you're in a location that doesn't have good internet connectivity, can your phone communicate peer-to-peer with the other phone? And then when one of the devices eventually gets internet connectivity, it relays to the blockchain. But that's an interesting, the last mile is a very interesting area of research.
So blockchain, as you mentioned, so this is the key technology that's been powering cryptocurrencies and Web3 excitements and so on and so forth. So just for our audience, blockchain technology or blockchain as a principle has got two, very quickly, for our, I'll just summarize the concept. It has got two main aspects to it. One is an immutable, publicly visible ledger, where you can only add data to it. You cannot modify or delete data that has been added in the past. And the other important aspect, which is the most crucial aspect of blockchain, is the fact that the data is added to this ledger via a consensus mechanism. So this consensus is pre-decided, and this works correctly under the assumption that majority of the participants of the network are honest. And we would like to sort of understand from you, so for this blockchain to work properly, why, of course it's working properly, but why immutability and consensus are so critical in the success of cryptocurrencies as a financial instrument?
Yeah, well, so historically in financial services, there's always been what are called trusted intermediaries, right? So if I have a dollar bill or rupees, and I want physically a piece of cash, like if I give it to one person, you kind of know in the physical world that I can't give you the same bill to another person. But in the digital world, historically, it's always been easy to make copies of things. If I have a photo on my phone, I could send the same photo to 100 people or 1,000 people, and it's really hard to prove that I have the photo, but you don't have the photo. That was really one of the core innovations that Bitcoin created, was this idea of digital scarcity. And it said, if I have one of these digital items, I know that I'm the only one who has it. Nobody else can have it. It solved what's called the double spending problem. And so they did that with this consensus mechanism. And it does require, the majority of participants on the network, it's actually not the number of participants, but it's the majority of the hashing power has to be good actors. It's 51% or more. And so far, there's been enough good people in the world who want to see cryptocurrency grow, and the incentives are aligned, where the people doing this this consensus algorithm with mining, cryptocurrency mining, they get rewards for mining. And so there's an incredible amount of computing power now backing up the Bitcoin network in a way that even some very determined, very well-resourced actor, state actor even, could have a very hard time trying to take down Bitcoin to try to get more than 51% of the network. So this consensus, we're sort of talking multiple topics. I guess the consensus algorithm was very important to eliminate this idea of trusted intermediaries. Because if everything has to run through a trusted intermediary, you tend to get monopolies, oligopolies, you get less innovation, you get high fees. And this is one of the reasons that payments have not innovated as quickly as other areas. So I guess I'll give you just an analogy here, and then we can, to wrap up. So think about pre-internet, how did people publish information? You had newspapers, radio, television, right? And those each had kind of centralized gatekeepers for each of those, because it was expensive to have a television station or a newspaper. You had to print, right? And so if you wanted to get a message out, you had to go to the head of this newspaper or television station, and it was a limited thing. And so the internet, by being a decentralized protocol, democratized publishing of information. It brought down the cost by an order of magnitude, but it made it so really anybody, even an average person, could create a website or host something on their computer. And so the decentralized nature of the internet was incredibly powerful for that democratizing force. Cryptocurrency is really doing the same thing, but with money and different forms of value, and now even other forms of data and artwork and things, where it's democratizing the transmission of value. You no longer have to go through a centralized gatekeeper like a bank or a credit card processing company or something like that, which might have their own incentive to have delays or cross-border issues or high fees. Now, I think India is almost an exception in this case, because with UPI and everything, I mean, honestly, that was a huge innovation and a step in the right direction. Most companies in the world have had nowhere near that amount of success. I mean, even in the United States. Yeah, China with WeChat, of course, there's privacy issues there, right? But I think in the US, for instance, it still takes 3 to 5 business days to do a bank transfer, whereas it should be instant and free, right? There's no reason why it should take that long. And so that is the promise of cryptocurrency, is it's gonna bring this more efficient, also probably more private financial infrastructure to not just one country, but every country in the world. It works cross-border, it works globally, hopefully. The privacy issues are eliminated. That would be an amazing thing for freedom and growth of the whole world.
So we'll talk about decentralization and centralization a little bit more from a moment from now. But so with regards to consensus, there is this general anxiety that, so if you look at Bitcoin networks, there are only few mining pools. So is it truly leading to decentralization, and is it safe, or there is a possibility of collusion even under such a setting?
Yeah, so the mining pools are something I am somewhat concerned about as well. I do think that cryptocurrency mining is very decentralized, and there's other forms of decentralization in terms of who is issuing new code updates, what exchanges are supporting different cryptocurrencies and different forks of the network. So there's sort of it's almost like different branches of government. There's exchanges, there's the core developers, there's also the miners. So there's various forms. I think the centralization of mining is a little bit of a concern with those mining pools. And I guess the point I would make here is that decentralization is not a binary yes or no, it's a spectrum. And so, we always have to think about trade-offs in computer science and really all engineering, and cryptocurrency is no different, where if you want to increase the decentralization, you tend to have trade-offs where you have to give up maybe how scalable the network is, or for instance, if you want to make the Bitcoin network where anybody in the world could run a node on their own laptop, which is sort of one of the goals of Bitcoin specifically, you need to make sure that the scalability issues are there, where it can run on that there. You want to make it available to anybody to run their own mining software. So anyway, sort of not the most clear answer, but yes, I'm concerned about it. I think that a lot more research needs to go into scaling of blockchains, decentralizing blockchains, finding the best trade-offs from an engineering point of view, and I hope that's something that some of the people here in the audience and on the video can help with.
Thank you. So Subhashish, do you want to take over? And
yeah, that was a very good introduction. So when it comes to cryptocurrencies, and the political economy of it is a concern amongst students, people like us, and in general. So when you talk about centralization and decentralization, I think that the crux is there. And we are used to central banks stabilizing the currency, so they control the supply, and also they change lending rates and the liquidation rates, so that both the inflation and the deflation is sort of controlled by a central bank. Now, when you look at a cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, right, the supply rate is very, very determined. It's fixed. It's very predictable. So you're halving every year the number of coins that can be mined. But there's a concern on the demand side. There's a certain liquidation. There'll be price volatility, and there's nobody controlling it. So why is decentralization such a desirable feature?
Well, a lot to unpack there. So I'll start by talking for a minute just about the volatility of Bitcoin, because I think you're correct that central banks around the world do try to mitigate the swings of volatility. So Bitcoin is not intended to be entirely stable. There's actually another category of cryptocurrencies called stablecoins, which are intended to be entirely stable, which is valuable for commerce and contracts and things like that. Bitcoin is really trying to be more like digital gold, which there's no central bank for gold, but the supply of gold in the Earth's crust, is finite, and so this is an important point, which is that cryptocurrency is actually many different things. There's Bitcoin, which is trying to be digital gold. There's like a commodity. There's some stable coins, which are trying to be more like currencies. There's even some cryptocurrencies which are trying to be like securities or stocks, like helping people raise money for a company. There's other cryptocurrencies which are like artwork, like NFTs. So this is one thing. It's confusing for people to come into cryptocurrency because they think, what is this thing? But it's actually, it can be, there's many types of cryptocurrencies now that are trying to be different things. Let's see, going back to your question about, it wasn't about consensus, you were asking about?
Centralization.
Centralization, yeah.
So for example, if you come to say currency, stable coin, can it really work without somebody playing a stabilization role? Because who controls inflation, who controls deflation, who controls the lending rates, and so on and so forth? Can market determine this automatically? That's the question.
I believe yes. So it's like asking, well, the internet is decentralized. So how does it work? There's nobody sort of moderating it. There are sort of standards bodies that people come and they try to meet at conferences several times per year. But so far, DeFi, which is sort of like the decentralized internet-based version of some of these marketplaces, it has worked. Gold has no central planning, but it has worked. So I don't think that, like, Bitcoin is not going to be as stable as some fiat currencies, but I do think it will be similar to a profile of like gold over time. Let me just say a comment on, I guess, centralization versus decentralization. Decentralization is not better in every way, right? There's trade-offs to everything. So I think the pros of decentralization is that there isn't any one group of people in charge, because sometimes when there is a group that's in charge, something will be manipulated for their own benefit, right? If you look at history, there's been thousands of fiat currencies over time, and generally when they become decoupled from hard assets, they lead to inflation. That's just been the history of fiat money, right? And so decentralization has a very nice property, which is that there is no small group of people who can manipulate it. That's why people trust Bitcoin and they believe that it has long-term potential. Now, the trade-off, there's a downside to decentralization as well, which is, you mentioned the volatility of Bitcoin. So there's not a central bank moderating it. It's more like gold. The other downside of decentralization is that it's harder to upgrade these protocols, right? Look at like the HTTP protocol has only been upgraded, I think maybe like once or twice in the last 25 years. It's very slow to upgrade because there's nobody in charge. And so it's a chaos almost of like, how do you slowly get these upgrades? Or remember like IPv4 went to the IPv6 standard. You know, it's been taking like 20 years or something to upgrade.
There in the institute.
Right, right. And so if you look at a central, or look at messaging protocols or something like that, right? I mean, WeChat or WhatsApp, they're able to very quickly add features, emojis and videos and voice notes and all these things because it's more of a centralized protocol. So the downside of decentralized protocols is they tend to be almost like frozen in time. They're very slow to upgrade. Ethereum is working to upgrade to Ethereum 2, and they're making progress towards that, but it is taking a very long time. So it has resilience as it's decentralized, but it moves slower.
So the other concern that many people have, and so there's some student questions as well, that there are only certain kinds of goods and services that you can buy with the cryptocurrency right now, even with stablecoin. So you can't buy everyday product. I can't buy toothpaste in India, for example. So given that scenario, how will price stabilization or price fixation and determination happen with respect to the fiat currencies? Or do you foresee a situation where fiat currencies will be completely replaced someday by this kind of a cryptocurrency?
Yeah, so I don't think cryptocurrencies are going to replace fiat currencies. Stablecoins, actually, many of the stablecoins are actually a digitized version of fiat currencies themselves. So there's digital rupee, digital dollar, and
Digital rupee is being proposed by a finance minister. So the details are a little unclear as of now.
Right. So I think many countries are going to go build, they're called central bank digital currencies. China is probably the farthest ahead on this. They've actually been working on digital yuan for probably 6 years at this point, and it's actually live in several major cities in China. People are actually using it already. The US is a little behind on this, I think. I've spoken with people there in Treasury, and they have some interest in it, but there's very little work happening. The private market in the United States has created stable coins like USD coin. And so I think in the US it may end up being that the private market solutions will become regulated and blessed. Those will become the central bank digital currencies. That's a guess, a theory. I think that India probably should have a central bank digital currency. That would probably be a good thing. It would improve the ability for people to use rupee in low friction ways and in more international commerce. It would help India grow as a financial hub. By the way, there's also stable coins that are not central bank backed. They're actually, they attempt to use various market dynamics to kind of stabilize the price using smart contracts, which is a whole fascinating field. So I hope that someday actually cryptocurrency will be used for commerce to buy toothpaste and all these things. I think that won't be the early use case. The early use case is happening more online in these online games and communities, and to buy NFTs. It's more like digitally native things where you want to participate in a global economy. Like if you want to sell your artwork, or this online community have people from all over the world joining it, it's more fair and more equitable to use a digital currency, because then you can have people from all over the world participate, and it's not based on one country's currency. But eventually, I hope toothpaste and everything gets there with more use cases.
Yes, so do we